Okay, so that's my turn. I understand. I'm the first rocket to be launched.
I will first introduce the speakers and then give you the floor, Anne. Well, we're back with ELÍNA and our first panel, and I suggest we start. I would like to welcome our first three speakers, starting with Christopher Weissberg, who's Senior Political Advisor to Jean-Baptiste Lemoyne, the French Minister for SMEs, Trade, Tourism, and the French expatriate community. Actually, Christopher and I have known each other for quite a while already, a few years, and it is a pleasure for me and for us to welcome him in our webinar today. And I should also add that Christopher himself is a diaspora member as a French-American with roots, childhood, and life as a young adult in the state of New York in the USA. TELMO BALTAZAR is our second panelist. He's Principal Advisor for Political and Corporate Communication to the European Commission Directorate General for Communication. Mr. Baltazar is a Portuguese national, and we all know that Portugal is a country with a significant and remarkable diaspora experience socially, politically, and institutionally. Mr. Baltazar is a long-time Commission civil servant. Prior to the position that he currently holds, he served as an advisor to former Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, and before that to former Commissioner Viviane Reding. Anne GENETET is our third speaker. Anne is the sitting member of the French Parliament representing French expatriates living to the east of the European Union. Her constituency extends from Ukraine to the Pacific Islands. Anne is, in fact, the MP for the French living in Ukraine and in Russia. And she's joining us today from Singapore, where she's been living for years and where she arrived a few hours ago only. I'm quite honored and touched that Anne agreed to speak at our webinar in spite of the time difference and I guess a bit of a jet lag too. I suggest precisely to start with Anne and ask her to share with us her perspective of diaspora-friendly media activities in her huge constituency with close to 50 countries, if I correctly remember, numerous time zones and thousands of kilometers to cover from one end to the other. How critical are the media to reach out to such a scattered expatriate community and to relay their concerns and expectations into the public domain, public policy domain? In her address, Anne will also share with us, of course, the relevance of media to reach out to diaspora communities in Ukraine, and obviously the French community is one, but also to Ukrainian and Russian diasporas in France. That experience is so timely, and I'm very honored that Anne is with us. The floor is yours, Anne, for 10 minutes before we move to the other panelists and then the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Thanks to all of you for inviting me today. It's an honor for me being here, and don't worry, I'm not jet lagged much, so it should be all right. Yes, my constituency covers 49 countries precisely, and altogether it means about 150,000 French people living there. In Ukraine, precisely, we had registered 1,000 French people living in Ukraine. What France organizes that we can, as a French people living abroad, register with our French consulate. However, we know that many French people do not register for many reasons. And you will see how it has an impact later on. So in Ukraine, we used to have 1,000 French people living there. In Russia, and we cover the two countries altogether, a little bit less than 5,000. In both countries, most of the diaspora is with the French people whose spouse is a local national, or themselves they have two citizenships, which means that they are really in these countries that are behaving really as French people and as local people. This has a very much importance in what has happened today, the past weeks. In Ukrainians, we used to have, before the war, 15,000 Ukrainians registered and working in France, which is quite low compared to Spain, where it is 100,000 Ukrainian people, and in Italy, where you have 280,000 Ukrainians living there. And this is related to the fact that it is mostly women, and they come for working in retirement house or as nurses or caregivers, any kind of caregivers. Where in France, we have a different kind of organizations. So let's come back to the war. France had, and together with Ukrainian authorities, thought that there would not be any war. So initially, and I will get back to the media later, initially it was decided to tell French people, please remain in Ukraine, don't move. And just before I move on about the media, it is quite hard for the media to get in touch with our diaspora. We have very few medias dedicated to the French diaspora. And it's actually very complicated, very tough to know how many people they do reach through their various reports, whether it is TV, radio, radio broadcasts, or newspapers. Of course, we have internet. Regarding TV programs, unfortunately, for the property, the intellectual property, it's quite tough to view French TV abroad. Some of it we can see, but most it is not very well covered. In Ukraine, that's a little bit, but it's not that easy. And again, those French people living in Ukraine and Russia, what they do, they mostly get in touch with local media, Ukrainian media or Russian media. They watch or read, go through those medias. When the war started, for the past 3 weeks, when it was clear that the whole of Ukraine would be invaded, then we asked, and the French authorities, and I guess that Christopher will get back to this, decided to recommend and to tell French people, please leave the country. And then when this happened, we discovered another 700 French people who were not registered. Nobody knew they were there, and who appeared and suddenly said, please help me to get out of Kharkov or Kiev or Odessa or Kherson or Mariupol. So it was quite tough for us to get in touch with them and find the solutions to help them escape. And on top of that, we've seen about 150 journalists, French journalists, coming over to Ukraine just to cover the war. And that made it also very complicated for our authorities, because they said to them, they told them, okay, we need journalists, we need reporters, but please be aware that the situation is so severe in some and so dangerous in some areas that we cannot assure you that we can help you to escape if there was any danger. So you see about maybe close to 2,000 French people altogether at some point, including the journalists. I have to say that we have what we call conseillers des Français à l'étranger, which are French local elected citizens who are kind of a link between our local nationals and the French administration, whether the consulate in Ukraine or in the local country or in France. In Ukraine, we have one, and I have to pay some tribute to David Franck, who did a remarkable job helping the French people getting out of Ukraine in very dangerous conditions, trying to find buses or taxis or cars or trains or sometimes food or some kind a dog keeper, because they had some animals to take care of before they could leave the country. So very complicated job. And in the countries around, in Poland, in Romania, in Moldavia, in Hungary, in Slovakia, we also have French elected people there, and all of them, they made like a team of French people helping those French people with Ukraine. And they went to the borders, they helped them find some, once they could escape the country and exit the country, help them find some housing, some food, some transportation to go to where they wanted to go. So really, our diaspora was really helpful. Unfortunately, I don't see clearly, frankly speaking, any help from the medias. All the contrary, the media were sometimes like kind of a burden to them. And they could, in some cases, help, but actually the media just tried to get in touch with some French people, just to make the buzz, and just to find the specific case that was, of course, excessively complicated. Just think that those people were just shelled, bombed, attacked daily. The level of anxiety was such that in that case, you feel that France is not there. All these people, they were just waiting for maybe kind of airplane coming from the sky, helicopter, who knows, just coming there, taking them out of this hell and getting them back out of the country. So, of course, this could not happen. And the journalists, they could sometimes get in touch with one of those very anxious French people and just sending this story of French people saying, oh, I feel alone, nobody's helping me, which was not the case. And Christopher will very probably tell you how French people were helped. And really, what the French authorities do for our national is quite incredible. That has nothing to compare with many other countries. I'm personally very proud of what my country is doing for my own citizens. But of course, when it is so much anxiety, you feel like you are like abandoned. And I want to highlight one specific point that will be my last point. We discovered through Ukraine that Ukraine is a country where we have the gestation pour autrui GPA, I don't know how you call it in English. And every year we had 140 births that were declared in the French consulate. Out of them, 102 were to legalize GPAs, which is a lot. And it means roughly 2 babies a week born through a GPA. And of course, journalists found those parents who were there just temporary to get their babies and take them back to France with, you imagine, no possibility to get a regular birth certificate in Ukraine, very difficult to get a transcription of this birth certificate in the French legal system. So yes, these people were quite a problem for themselves, for the babies, and for the French authorities. And you see, the media, they focus on those people. And I got 2 or 3 interviews by media about that. So of course, just because we have the babies and we have to save the babies, the French authorities again made their best to get the parents and the babies out of the country. But I feel that it's terrible to see the media just focusing on this particular problem and forgetting the thousands of French people who were just living there regularly in Ukraine and just wanted to escape, living there, sometimes a spouse, sometimes parents, brothers, sisters, cousins. They had to leave their homes, their lives, just to escape as fast as they could with just a bag and sometimes a suitcase, but barely. So that would be my last point. The medias were clearly not helpful. Maybe we can find some other different examples, but from my perspective, no, media were not helpful. The only thing is that now when coming to French people in Russia and Ukrainian and Russian diaspora in France, there the media were very helpful. And I remember one day I was on the TV show and I just took the opportunity to ask, because I heard this theater deciding to resign a Russian conductor. This bookshop decided to remove Dostoevsky books from its shelves. Things that were completely unbelievable. So this day on the TV show, I said, please, because Mr. Putin has closed all possibility of foreign media to talk about what is happening in Ukraine, our last hope to get in touch with Russian people is to go through their family members, this Russian diaspora who is in Europe. So please do get in touch with them, talk to them, try to explain to them what is the truth of what is happening in Ukraine. I had the same conversation with my own colleagues, asking them, please, if you hear about any Russian people living in your constituency, please go and talk to them. Don't leave them alone. Don't let them be harassed by other people who do not really understand. Russian people living in Europe are definitely not responsible for what is happening in Ukraine. So there, in that particular case, I think that really medias were really, really helpful. So I would make a distinction between medias talking about what is happening in Ukraine and regarding the French community, I mean, helping our French community, and media in France or maybe in other European countries trying to give the story of what is happening in Ukraine and trying to get in touch with Russian people. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you actually for your very blunt and clear statement. about, you know, the difference that exists between media treatment applying to European expatriates in that case, French expatriates in Ukraine, and the attention that media had for the Ukrainian diaspora and also the Russian diaspora in Europe, and in that case in France, in order to rocket back to the country where obviously media freedom has been severely restricted.
Ja, informatie gaf.
Cool. Oh, okay, sorry. Well, thank you. And I now pass on the floor to Mr. Baltazar, whose perspective from the European Commission and corporate communication is truly important to help us understand the reach of media in relation to our diasporas abroad, and possibly also apply to the very unfortunate situation in Ukraine. Mr. Baltazar, the floor is yours for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to you, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Also, would like to thank the previous speaker, Madame GENETET, I think for a you know, let's say almost live reporting of the situation, very sad situation that is affecting Europe. I would like just to start. I will focus on some of the points made by Ms. GENETET, but I would like before just to remind us a little bit all. Think of some of the basics that we have when it comes to the benefits that EU citizenship has offered to all, let's say, Europeans and the European diasporas. And I think we should also bear in mind also then how do we approach the issues of media and communication to those communities more broadly. I'd like just to remind of all of us that the fact that we have a EU member state nationality allow us immediately grant us the EU citizenship with all the set of rights that sometimes you know, some of us take it for granted and others are actually fighting to join it and benefit from this. And I think those of us who have been born and lived some years in, let's say, previous regimes before our member states joined the European Union, appreciate very much those rights. I would like just to shorten the presentation in this part to give you a little bit of my private experience in the early 80s. Sorry, I was a teenager. I wanted to travel in Europe. Didn't have a lot of means, but I, you know, was trying, and I tried to. It was before Portugal joined the EEC, so in early 80s. I was not allowed into France because I didn't have ways of, you know, to prove the means of subsistence, and actually people fear that I would be joining the Portuguese diaspora there, bearing in mind that Paris is the second largest Portuguese town in the world. The fact is that I am the same person, older, probably wiser, but now the rights that I was given since the joining the EU allows me, for instance, to stand up as a candidate and become the mayor of Paris. And bearing in mind the Portuguese diaspora there, I will probably be successful. So the point I want to pass across, and I'm sure all of us dealing with diasporas have seen it, but we sometimes fail to acknowledge of this, and I think it's unique across the world, the fact that, you know, we have a nationality, and that because of that nationality, we have a whole set of rights that are enforceable, not just in the territory of your country, but actually into a much wider geography. And this applies also, I mean, we do not need to go to all the rights and obligations, but I think I wanted just to remind some of them. Consular protection. The fact that even if you are a national from you know, a smaller, shall we say, European member state, in case of need, if their country is not represented in a third country, you can apply and seek protection, consular protection, and be even repatriated to your own country. Something that happened to hundreds of thousands of people in 2 years ago when COVID, the pandemic started, and there was the need to, shall we say, repatriate or bring some nationals back to their home countries. Secondly, and I think also the fact that all of our member states have, you know, people living in countries other than the ones they were born. I mean, within the EU, we calculate to be about 13 to 14 million, Europeans who live in member states other than the ones of their origin, and this has, in my view, only bring benefits to the creation of our common, let's say, European identity on top of the national identity. I liked very much when you mentioned in the intervention in the beginning, when you mentioned the Españoles and abroad, and I think the Portuguese have a similar problem. Probably we should do something with the Latvians and others, and even create a European abroad type of format to actually show how these how different cultures interact and how they enrich each other. So that about the European citizenship, and I think the quite revolutionary advances it brought to all of us, and I wanted to stress this point. Many people, including our Ukrainian partners, want to join this project. And I think it's very important that we bear this in mind, of the strength of the attractiveness, in addition to the economic and the strategic issues, also the, let's say, the human side of the individual rights that EU citizenship offers to them. A little bit on some of the points more to the issue at hand and to the reality in the moment. Ms. GENETET, I was really appreciated of the fact that you've mentioned something that where we have been working, and I think even we are working in real time, which is how to address the issues of how to reach the Russians living in Europe and Russian families as a conduit to transmit information, rather than being simply subject to disinformation campaigns which exist. And I think we do not even need to discuss this or to question, but how to make sure that they actually have access, in as much as possible, in their native language, of the reality on the ground, and what types of, shall we say, diaspora networks we should use in order to reach that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. As well, the same thing for the Ukrainians, not just the Ukrainians who we are now welcoming, but also the Ukrainians who have already been here. And I'll just give you a couple of facts that we have to bear in mind, the sheer dimension of these diasporas. I mean, we have calculated on the basis of recent Eurostat data, just give you the highest numbers. In Germany, we count about 235,000 Russian nationals living, and 133,000 Ukrainians. I mean, Italy, just give you an idea so that we bear this in mind, we have estimates of 37,000 Russian nationals, with people with Russian citizenship living in Italy, and about 230,000 Ukrainians. So you see the importance already of these communities. I mean, I could go on for much longer. I'll give you even the example of Portugal. Sometimes we forget about this kind of outliers. I mean, in Portugal, there are about 5,000 Russians estimate living, and 30,000 Ukrainians. It has to do with some past migratory movements. So, I mean, but to give you another example, also in terms of percentage, very quickly, about 6 to 7% of people living in Estonia have Russian citizenship. So I think we have to and then of course those who are double nationality, which we do not necessarily count, also important figures in Latvia. So the question being, from a media perspective, how do we use these figures or this situation to our advantage? And our advantage being, as much as possible, communicate what we see as to be the reality on the ground, but also what are the exact actions that we, the EU in this case, could add the Western world, is taken in order to sanction the aggressors and to reach out to the people. We have just give you a couple of very concrete examples for the Ukrainians who we are welcoming, escaping from the Russian aggression. We have set up already systems of, including a website explaining the rights, what they are entitled to, what they should do on an operational basis, also in Ukrainian. I think this is the first time that we have been issuing official websites also in Ukrainian, and as well as we try to communicate to them using already the networks that we have, the European Union or Commission networks on the ground, the representations, the European direct centers, but to ensure that that information gets in as much as possible to the networks that are needed. Not an easy job, particularly because the media. We are in touch with the local media to ensure, in particular, that they are the ones transmitting that information to the networks or the diaspora networks that are needed. The same thing about making sure that all our official documents. So these are the official documents. When you hear the big announcements saying we are issuing sanctions to this and that, or we are taking these measures, that they are translated not just in the official language of the EU, as well as in Russian and in Ukrainian. Make sure that in as much as possible they can reach directly, and so without any possible disinformation filter when it particularly comes to Russian, that they reach directly to the people, or in as much as possible, knowing of course the limitations. I wanted to end this presentation, devote more time to the question and A, also to just reminding good examples, and these are good examples. These are good examples of communicating to the diaspora. I wanted to draw attention, possibly invite those who haven't seen it to look at it. The quick video made by Arnold Schwarzenegger yesterday, where he tells where he speaks in English with translation in Russian, where it addresses Russians abroad, and hopefully getting through the wall of lies erected by the Putin regime directly to the people, giving a very poignant, very touchy, personal view and the personal story, and trying to communicate to the average Russian national that this is a wrong war, and explaining and giving the reasons why, and deconstructing some of the deceitful narratives by the Putin regime. And I think it's a very intelligent way where we use, well, we collectively, the West in this case, but where one can use people who have enormous international recognition, admired or loathed, peu importe, but at least that they are recognizable and recognized to actually send out these messages. Possibly it's very much more powerful than simply the media transmission. I think the media is very important, and we have just one of the points made by Madame GENETET. I think we need to talk more to them. I mean, we have all the representations of the European Commission talking in as much as possible with editors, news editors, and I told you local media, etc., to explain. We are not selling a narrative, we are explaining what it is that we are doing, how it is been doing, and what will be the impact. So as much as possible, I think also there's a kind of almost obligation of the public institutions in this case to be talking on as much as possible to media's journalists, but also editors. I wanted to really stop here, and so that we actually look more into the what can be done. And I would really like to if you have good ideas, advice, please do not hesitate in sharing. I'll make sure that they will be put in the machine. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Muito obrigado, Senor Baltazar. I take 2 points out of your comments. Number one is the need globally for us, for the Commission, but for anyone active, interested, mobilized on these topics, to talk more to the media, and this particularly locally, so that we bring the information bottom up, instead of thinking that media functions are always top down. That's actually also a lesson I draw from my experience from years and years ago as a local journalist. Local is important. Second element that I penciled down, on my notes, it is the need through media action with careful media policy to deconstruct the narrative of applying to certain situations, and quite obviously in Ukraine at the moment. And this is definitely an angle on which we need to reflect and maybe develop some proposals, as you suggested. Let me now give the floor to Christopher Weissberg, who is our third panelist. Thanking again Christopher for finding time in his very busy and intense schedule with his minister in France. It's a pleasure for me to have Christopher in this webinar, through the institutional job that is his, but also his personal background as a French American who understands, because that's his life, what a diaspora is. Christopher, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Pierre-Yves, and I'll try to be even shorter than 10 minutes in order to take questions. I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank ELÍNA for this webinar on a topic that is at the same time very fascinating and I think not enough standard on different medias. I'd like to thank Anne for the incredible job she's done during the war and during the crisis for our community in Ukraine. We also have, and she mentioned his name, David Frank, who was one of our local representatives who's been in touch with us to keep track of the French over there, have them coming back to France, and now trying to give them some support now that they are in France and that they, for some of them, lost most of their life back there. So it's a work in progress, but I'd like to thank Anne for the incredible job she's been doing with us about this. I'd like, before going on the issue of the Ukraine situation and the Russian situation, to talk more generally about diasporas, and maybe let you know that France, and Pierre-Yves is a former MP and Anne is a current MP, has one of the most, maybe one of the best, French like to say they always are the best in what they're doing, but let's try to be objective and say that one of the fine-tunedest representation of the French living abroad. We have senators, we have députés like Anne, we have local representatives. We have actually executive boards of local representatives who have also lots of powers to take care of the community. France is also doing a lot of things in terms of consular protection, and Anne was mentioning what we did for the Ukraine situation, but also during the pandemics. The French government sent vaccination to the French who had not access to local system of vaccinations. There were also some social benefits and social allowances that were provided for the people who needed so locally. And also we have a very large and I think generous representation and system of protection for the French living abroad. I still don't think that it is, and that would be one of the topics you will raise today, the most maybe the best way to actually, the sense of identity, of the French identity abroad, I think is still lacking. Probably because unlike Portuguese communities or Irish communities, the French don't see themselves as diasporas, but more as expats. And I think this is something that needs to be understood, and particularly in the Ukraine, with all that many refugees that are going to come from Ukraine to the rest of the world, we're going to have a very large diaspora of Ukrainians. And I think that what we need to address is also how to strengthen the civil society of diasporas, the charities, the associations, because these are, I think, the most important bodies to embody the sense of identity of natives living abroad. And I wish, and sometimes this is one of my frustration working in the French government, that we would support better, particularly the medias. I really think that if you want to have a strong community abroad, you need strong medias that address their issues, that can talk to them about their concerns. And I really think that still in the context of the war we're going to face, it's very important that the people and the Ukrainians that are going to live abroad have also access to papers, to medias that can take into account their issues, and that can raise the topics of what's going on in their countries with their perspective. And I think this is something that we need to address. I also think, and maybe your academic professor will raise the issue, but there is a distinction between expats and diaspora. Expats are usually living abroad for professional reasons, and of course they don't have the same sense of identity about being a national abroad that a diaspora have. And I think that all that can strengthen the civil society and the sense of belonging to a community is something that is essential in order to promote the communities abroad. And so that's my first point I wanted to make. And of course, I can answer your questions about what the government is doing for its diaspora abroad. But I wanted to start with this first little speech about the difference between diaspora and expats and how to relate to the medias about them.
Thank you, Christopher. Actually, it is important, as you mentioned, to establish a difference between expatriate communities, where the perception is often that living abroad is for a moment in life, but not the entire life, and diaspora sense of belonging, where usually you live abroad for your entire life, and your perception is actually impacted by that very much. That's a point that probably differs from one nationality to the other, depending on how countries relate to their own diasporas. And the example that you gave, for instance, of the Portuguese, and here we have Mr. Baltazar, who could and did already share his perspective, but also the Irish community is a good example. And I could even think at regional level of the structuring of the Galician community in Spain, and how the Galician community really impacts politics and economic development back home, between La Coruña and Vigo. The second point that struck me in the comments that you made is definitely to develop a stronger media action, media presence, reporting on the needs, perceptions, fears, and ideas, to speak positively, of our diasporas or expatriate communities, in order to be, in better tune with what is felt back home, and also what is felt in the country where people live, because it's a two-way process. All right, so we have listened to our three speakers. GENETET mentioned that she wanted to cover 2 extra points that she felt would be needed before we get into the Q&A. So Anne, I give you the floor for these comments, and then we'll turn to the questions.
Thank you. Very shortly. Thank you, Claire. Very, very shortly. And actually, I have a third one, which I will be starting with, listening to Christopher and Mr. Baltazar about Russia. Russia has, in Europe, we have closed down RT and Sputnik, the 2 medias that were allowed to broadcast in Europe. Following that, because they want, how they want to send this deconstructed message, the fake news, it's now going through the embassies, the Russian embassies all over Europe. And the problem is that an account, a Twitter account, a Facebook account, an Instagram account that belongs to a Russian embassy cannot be moderated as any other account because it is an official diplomat account. So we have here a problem, and if you read through these Twitter accounts, you will see that the stories they tell is the propaganda, the Russian propaganda. So we have a problem in here. We have to think about how to counter these propaganda through the embassies. Second point, I read yesterday an idea from a French national somewhere in France saying that maybe we should display some or give some message in Ukrainian just at the end, a short message in Ukrainian about the news at the end of the TV news program in the evening in France. That would be an idea just for a few minutes, just to give some insights in Ukrainian, in their native language. And the last point is to give you the example, because you're looking for ideas. I would like to give you the example of the Australian broadcast, SBS Broadcasting System in Australia. It is a very interesting radio funded on public funds. It's public funding, and it gives broadcasting programs in, I think, 150 different languages. And it is dedicated to reach out to these local communities who are based in Australia, living in Australia, to talk to them in their native languages. The idea underlying this was to reach out to Arabic people living in Australia, make sure that the message that they would receive would be controlled by Australian authorities in a sense. So, and we have also a short 1 hour weekly program in French. So here we could think about maybe what about some public funding to have this radio in Russian, in Ukrainian, giving some truth about what is happening in Ukraine. That is just my idea based on what SBS Australia is doing.
Thank you, Anne. These are critical comments, and I assume Mr. Baltazar will probably have a reaction to that. Mr. Baltazar, maybe on the proposal made by Angela to develop more in reaching out to the communities.
Thank you. Yes, a couple of things on the points made by Ms. GENETET on the official accounts of I think a very important point. Now that the channels of propaganda, and I think there's a big debate going on about media freedom of expression and actually full propaganda, and that needs also to be considered also and discussed always on the legal side. But on the point that you've made regarding the accounts of official accounts, that they do not have any filter. Well, the accounts do not have any filter, but people reporting on them, and the media should report on whatever is given out by the government or by other entities. That should be where the report should be done as well. That the media also do not take anything that is given just by face value, but that actually considers being more critical, because that's why the media exists, to be critical, not just to be the propagator or amplifying official messages. Now, the point you also made a very, very interesting point regarding how could broadcasts issue short messages at the end of the news cycles, for instance, in Ukrainian, so that we reach to more directly to, well, now the millions of people who have now joined us. That's a good point. One that can possibly be discussed more widely. We are already trying to do that from an official European Commission communication, where again we find ways to translate relevant information, notably about the issues regarding the legal status of people moving into the EU, where we are already translating these issues already in Ukrainian, and all ensuring that it reach out as much as possible this community. So it's a good idea and possibly one to be discussed further with the media representatives and journalists. Now, the question about public funding, this is always I mean, this is an issue that we have been discussing already for many years about should media be funded directly or not by the public. You know that there are different opinions across our very diverse European Union about it. I wanted just to give you the example, you know, in as much as possible, even if it's not a public channel, there are, thinking particularly about Euronews, for instance, which has some EU funding, not for editorial content, but for making sure that its services are made available in different languages, notably also in Arabic and I think also Ukrainian and Russian. But the goal is that these, shall we say, independent media are able to transmit in as much as possible to different languages and to reach out to in this case their diasporas. I mean, public funding, you know, a big debate is more of a political debate about whether, you know, should one copy the model that in this case the Russians had. One point that I think I wanted just to strengthen that also on the presentation is the efforts. And this is something that should be done by public authorities, and we are doing it, the efforts of fighting disinformation. We are working, you know, our internal colleagues working jointly with those of the European Commission and those of the European External Action Service, which are the external body of the EU, let's put it this way, working in ways to always identify, tackle, deconstruct the narratives and present what we consider to be the official version of facts on disinformation campaigns launched notably from Moscow. And I think we've been quite successful because you know, we don't see a lot of take up from different medias, but of course they have a big outreach, so we need to keep on fighting it. And so the information campaign is very important. This is, I think, should be the primary concern of our public institutions, to identify as early as possible disinformation attempts and to correct things, if I can say.
Thank you, Mr. Baltazar. Now I turn the floor to our participants, hoping for hands to raise. No? Any
there are quite a few questions in our chat window. A lot of comments.
I saw comments from Valda Di Pina. Valda, would you like to take the floor and maybe comment?
Yes, I can do so. I found it very interesting, as you can see with my various chats and thoughts that I've shared. And it occurred to me just now, with Mr. Weissberg having said that a strong diaspora abroad needs a strong media abroad, and Mr. Baltazar speaking about government funding of media. It's something that, in fact, the Latvian diaspora media is very much concerned with. ELÍNA's brought it to the fore, and a number of us have been working on this. How much can you expect the various governments of countries to fund diaspora media so that it's a good quality media, and that, as I mentioned, for building trust with the diaspora, you know, with what we're talking about with Russia as well, it's all very well for us to say that we need to get the correct information into the Russian communities, but we need to have developed trust before they listen to us. And this is something that is going to take time, and I hope that we've learned a lesson from this. And yes, and SBS Radio is fantastic. I worked there for about 15 years, almost from the very inception when I started with 8 languages. When it built up to 15 languages a couple of years later, Latvian was included. It was part of the multicultural policy in Australia. And when I left, it was 160 languages. So yes, but it is very much focused, yes, on the diasporas in the country. Of course, with some various guidelines. But so, yeah, these are my comments. But I think, you know, I would encourage people to look at the SBS model, and they're my comments at the moment.
Thank you, Valda. I see your own comments, ELÍNA, and especially the last one in the chat on the consideration to give in communities marked by the general distrust in public media and public authorities. Could you maybe elaborate on that? And
thank you, Pierre-Yves. Well, actually, these points about reaching out to communities by public, to targeted communities by means of support by public funding can also run into unexpected hurdles, as I discussed in preparing this webinar. And this was a discussion in the context of Brexit, for instance, but which could apply to the Russian-speaking auditorium as well. There is this consideration that communities that have general distrust in public power, in public media, that have seen that media instrumentalized for political purposes, at times seeing a logo that a publication has been financed or financially supported by a particular, let's say, EU funding or other, could sort of automatically discredit it. As Valda already referred to before, there needs to be a climate of trust in order for the messages to reach the audience. And this begs the question as well, whether a more technical question, whether these official obligations to visibly advertise the use of public funds for reaching out to particular communities is actually serving the purpose, because it can be perceived as actually a propaganda tool.
Thank you, ELÍNA. I was also reading some of the comments made by Aiga. I hope I pronounce well. My apologies if I don't. On best examples of public funding drawn from countries with highest press freedom ranking. Aiga, would you like to develop that more into a statement?
Thank you. I believe I will have some time to elaborate a bit more on my statements in the last panel discussion, but here I would like to bring up 2 points. One is that we did close RT and Sputnik here in Europe, but to be honest, those are the channels that maybe we watched, or people like us watched, who speak English or speak German, or those are not channels directly working with Russian so-called diaspora in Europe. There are still plenty of channels available. We just were in Strasbourg for the European Parliament's session and watched Russia 24 in Russian. And the things they were telling there, it's in the middle of the war. Obviously, they don't say world war. They say it's special operation, and they just take footage and turn it upside down. They're all the time brainwashing people who speak Russian about what's going on in the world. And it's still widely available all over Europe. So, I mean, we closed down Sputnik Russia Today, but there are still so many disinformation and propaganda channels there that are working with Russian-speaking audiences here in Europe. And if you do a research on Russian-speaking population within European countries, and we did it in Latvia, the numbers are quite distressing. We did it in about 2 weeks already into war, and you have 20% of people supporting Putin, 20% of people supporting Ukraine, and 50% not being able to decide on which side they are. So I think it's still widely available there, and we have to figure a way both what to do with this in terms of how to stop it, how to stop Russia misusing and mocking basically our liberties, but also obviously the other thing is what's there from our side. What is the possibilities for Russian-speaking people to receive impartial, objective, quality journalism? And there, I mean, I think we will have to do a lot more in the current situation and the situation for years and maybe decades to come in supporting the journalists who have already fled Russia in a way that they can keep up the pluralistic media environment, Russian media environment. Because the question ELÍNA raised is really important about how not to interfere and how to also make sure that the tools we develop are the ones they actually need and are ready to take. And this will be something we have to really think about a lot in the coming, I guess, weeks and months, what we can already now provide for the Russian media fleeing Russia, because as you know, there are a lot of media now relocating to European countries and still trying to cater for the Russian audiences, but also for Russian audiences, both in Russia and also in the European Union. And the other thing I wanted to say is that we've been indeed in discussions and maybe a bit scared about public funding, but if it's done right, and if you look at the Nordic countries, they all rank highest in the press freedom indexes. They've had media support systems in place for years, really strong and really wide media support systems. So this is an example we could all look at and see how we can broaden the media support also provided by the European Union. So that would be all for the time being from my side. Thanks.
Thank you, Aiga. We are actually approaching the end of our first panel. I would like to give the floor back for a minute of comment or conclusion to each of our three panelists, starting with Anne. Anne, are you still with us? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. That was really interesting. And I think the approach that you have to think about what could be the role of media in this awful war, appalling situation, with the question being how we can reach out to local population, whether within Russia, within Ukraine now, and those communities living all over Europe and also beyond Europe, because I know that there's a community of 60,000 Ukrainians living in Toronto in Canada, for example. So we need to think about it. And it's the first time that, thanks to you, that I realized that we have quickly to think about how we could set up something to make sure that we get in touch with them. We have like 3 million refugees who do not master the local languages, the countries they are going to. So we have, and they cannot be left alone, whether they're Ukrainians or Russians, because with time going on, it could be that some Ukrainians start having some doubts. We can see also that the communication of the Zelensky government has to be taken into account. It's not a neutral communication. And I think we also have to say something about maybe not deconstructing Zelensky communication, but precising his communication maybe. He should not be the only one managing, monitoring, mastering the narrative. We also have to, we can be a balance between the narratives. And we have to be aware that we can be the balance between the two narratives, of course, being more on the side of the Ukrainians, but we also have a role to play here. And in local languages, in Ukrainian languages, or Russian language, so that these people are not left alone with only one story they can get from their own countries. And we have to think clearly about how we could reach and find some answers, some quick answer, because we have to act quickly now. We shouldn't wait that much, because these people are not supposed to stay for so long in Europe. So it's now that we have to think about the narratives and what we could do, not 6 months from now, 1 year from now. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Anne. You know, we get the sense of urgency from, you know, your recommendations, and definitely share them. Mr. Baltazar, would you have a 1-minute concluding set of comments that you would like to share with us?
Yes, well, first thanks for the everyone, and also for the good reflections made. A couple, just 3 points I wanted to make, building upon Ms. GENETET's presentation and conclusion, which is the use. We have now up to 3 million people coming from Ukraine, escaping the violence and being welcomed. Probably more are expected. These people will be welcomed, but it's important that we, from a communication perspective, that we start telling their stories, that we have as much as possible their testimonials. The testimonials not saying that they have been welcomed, but also that Europeans are welcoming them, so that we need to have the voices of Europeans, all those who are showing solidarity through their actions or through the supports, other type of supports being given, but also the welcoming and the integration of these two worlds. Also to inform, and this is very important, to inform a wider audience, the 500 general Europeans, that this is something that is positive. Because we have also to bear in mind that if we have millions of people, putting pressure on social services, here or there in the future we might start having some, shall we say, difficulty. So it's important that already now, and I think the message of urgency, that we start to show these messages of testimonials, so that the positive wave of welcoming and integration, these people escaping from war and horror, continues on a positive note, bearing in mind that other sides will want to exploit negativity. The last point I wanted just two very quick points. First, on the need, support the media. We can support the media in different ways as well, more than simply financial transfers directly. First, to create the conditions, the spaces, and all the EU institutions. I think you have create conditions and technical conditions and other support for media to operate from Brussels, from Strasbourg, and inform as much as possible, and with all openness to our political actors on what's happening here. And I think this needs also to be, I won't say quantified, but borne in mind. A point regarding the use of social media, the important use of social media, also through the testimonials of important persons. And I think I also invite others, shall we say, political spaces, to use more these examples of very important personalities, influencers, if you want, to reach out to communities that might not be permeable to the normal medias. Okay, and I think this is really important, and the use of diasporas there and their own, let's say, first-hand direct testimonial might have an important dimension. And I think this, again, to thank everyone for the good ideas. I have to some takeaways that we will work on, particularly on regarding how to get to talk to the media directly on the ground, and particularly the local media now and for the months to come, to ensure that this notion, particularly of solidarity with Ukraine, continues to be on a positive note. Because let us not forget, this is my last point, let us not forget that other sides will want to let's say, disrupt this unity, and they've been doing that already for many years, notably through financing of political parties, through financing of media and disinformation campaigns, and they will not necessarily disappear, unfortunately.
Thank you, Mr. Baltazar. Christopher, it's for you to conclude.
Yeah, thank you very much. And very quickly, I think one of the points we raised today is how we need to think about the legitimacy of the voice of those communities. Legitimacy means same thing for the Ukrainians. Once they're going to arrive in Europe, they will have to be able to communicate to local authorities. And we will have to think about how we work on this partnership and how they are legitimate. And we talked about, obviously, the medias and how they are important, and how the independence of the media is key for this issue. And I think that from the conversation we had, one of the most important thing is to broaden as much as possible the funding of a quality press locally, which means basically, of course, state, but it cannot be just the state, because obviously, if you're coming from Russia, it is propaganda. But even France, when France is funding a French media abroad, it has also a way of communicate on its own action that is not that can be biased, and so often those papers are also funded with advertising, and so I think the EU could also be a great source of funding, because it has in its core values the principle of free independence. And I think that in terms of legitimacy, most Europeans recognize that the EU is very transparent and on those things. So I think that the EU has a key role in this aim. And thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to you all.
Well, thank you, Christopher, and thank you, Anne, and muito obrigado pela sua participação, Senhor Baltazar. It was a fascinating exercise in this first panel, and many takeaways for all of us to reflect on. There will be actually a paper developed on the basis of what we do today in order to share and take one step ahead in order to build that media element that to us is critical to diasporas and expatriate communities. With that being said, and 5 minutes behind schedule, I hand you the floor back, ELÍNA, for this technical break that we need to have before we set up the second panel. Thank you, Anne. Have a good rest, because it's already late in Singapore, and stay with us, because we will be coming back in 2 minutes.